That's
All right.
very good.
So I have
All
been,
right, sir. Whoops. Hang on. I'll be right back. It's okay.
all
No more
right.
distractions.
So, ladies and gentlemen, some people write about the universe. Timothy Ferris helped send a message into it. He is the author of 12 books, including The Whole Shebang and Coming of Age in the Milky Way, and the producer of the Voyager Golden Record. His book, Seeing in the Dark, was named one of New York Times 10 best nonfiction books in 2002. So, Timothy Ferris, welcome. It is a pleasure to be here with you. How are you
Well,
doing?
thank you, Daniel. Daniel, how you doing? I'm just fine. We're in the middle of a rainstorm up here in Sonoma County, and that's important because that's most of the water we get all year. So glad to see it. But, there may be a little background noise from time to time.
That's fine with me. I'm okay with background noise. I'm a country boy. So I've got some questions I'm just gonna um hammer to you. I one would be when you first had the instinct to look up at the sky, the curiosity, and wonder what was there, what was the attraction and what was the feeling that was inside of you that made you want to continue to look?
Well, I think I thought about this a bit, and I wrote about it in a book called "Seeing in the Dark" because it was obviously sort of a formative experience. I think what happened was that I was born in Miami, and my parents were kind of prominent cafe society folks. Their names in the paper and all in Miami Beach. And then all that crashed when I was about in the second or third grade, and we lost all our money, and we moved up to Deerfield Beach, which was then and is still a place that people who've crashed out in Miami go to recover and regroup. So we were living in a little tiny house, and my dad was working as loading cement bags on flatbed trucks and driving them out to construction sites and hoping he'd get workers there to help him unload the truck. Showed me a lot about what a man can be. He suffered this fall and just responded by really taking care of his family. Weekends he would write fiction for magazines to make a little extra money, as they rather laughingly call it. There wasn't much up there except a local branch library. I'd never been to a library before, and that was astounding to me. And I learned a lot by reading everything I could from the library. Um, and there was the night sky, which was quite dark and clear and beautiful. And I began learning about the constellations and reading these books I would get from the library. And I discovered that that the Earth is a planet and the sun was a star, and that there are many other stars. They didn't know about other planets back then. We'd now say that the Milky Way galaxy has something approaching a half trillion planets. And I just wanted to know more about that. The thing that impressed me the most was I read in one book that the Earth hadn't always been here, but that the Earth and the sun had formed something under 5 billion years ago. Um, from an interstellar cloud, and that's how all the other stars and planets got there as well. And I found that just astounding. We were really rural. There was a truck farming community. I would run around barefoot in this thick, loamy earth. At night, I would look up at the stars, and I would realize it's all the same thing. And therefore, if I want to understand this place, I need to keep learning about those other places.
That is fascinating how you're saying that it's all connected. That's it reminds me of David Bowie, but we'll get to that. Um I'm excited for that. Um Whenever you first saw like Mars through your telescope, uh, what changed in your sense of scale and what no longer felt perhaps believable about an Earth-sized life? And at that age, did you really think about it, or did you just kind of like intuitively sense it?
Well, I had a little tiny refractor that my parents gave me for Christmas, a 1.6 inch refractor, meaning that it had an objective lens about the size of one of the lenses on my glasses here. And it had a single eyepiece that you could take apart and rearrange and the lenses to make a different power. It was about as cheap a telescope as you could use for astronomy. But even with that, excuse me, even with that telescope, what I could see on Mars wasn't that different from what the professional astronomers could see. You could see that there were polar caps, and you could see these dark areas that looked like continents of some sort. Mars was so mysterious in those days. Percival Lowell had built, of the Boston Lowells, had built a observatory in Flagstaff, Arizona, solely for the purpose, their primary purpose of observing Mars during these oppositions that occur every 2 years when the two planets are closest together. And decades later, I was able to use Percival Lowell's telescope, and intriguingly, again, you couldn't see that much. It was just pretty much as I've described. And Lowell thought he saw these canals, and they turned out to be optical illusions. I never saw anything like that. So it was an exciting thing in that you had a sense of being close to the edge of discovery of this planet that had fascinated people for so long. There'd been all this science fiction writing about Martians invading the Earth, or how to communicate with them if you bought into Percival Lowell's hypothesis. There were discussions about digging, channeling out a huge triangle in Siberia and filling it with oil and setting it on fire at the closest point so that the Martians could see that there was someone here signaling them. The boundaries between science and science fiction were rather more blurry in those days. It's also a time of, which we're seeing again a little bit now, of UFO enthusiasms. There wasn't anything to it then, and wasn't now, and there isn't now. But whether there are UFOs or not has nothing really to do with the question of life in a universe in which there are trillions of planets, and on which life could and almost certainly has evolved. The big question with extraterrestrial life isn't space, it's time. We don't know how long civilizations, once they appear, survive. And that's kind of a pertinent question for us. We don't yet have the technological capacity or the knowledge to answer it, and those answers may be a long way off, but they're certainly something to work toward.
What do you think it would take to answer a question like that? Like, would it take develop into perhaps AI to
We just need much better sensing across the galaxy, and that's all going to be attainable. It's an interesting period now because we still tend to think of the future in terms of we what we do here on Earth and what we're going to do on Earth in the future. But our technological future lies largely in space. The price of getting material into orbit has dropped in the last 10 years by 95%. That was the big obstacle toward doing major projects off Earth. And in fact, we're about to see lunar colonies and the beginning of large-scale engineering beyond Earth. You don't really want to be building most of starships on Earth and then lifting everything up there. You can build them in orbit around the moon and such. The moon has plenty of resources for building vast structures off Earth, which is what we're going to need. And the motive for all this is not just science and exploration, but money. For many years, we've heard from self-described environmentalists that, and I mean by that, people haven't studied environmentalism, but rather have a kind of belief system out of which they develop all of these proposals, that that we cannot sustain growth indefinitely as a species on a planet that has limited resources. The answer to that is those resources aren't going to come from this planet. They're going to come from elsewhere in the solar system. But really, the asteroid belt is where vast fortunes are going to be made and progress in technology. A single metal-rich asteroid is worth more at current market value than the entire wealth of the human species. So that purpose of Mars, people don't seem to understand. The reason that some people will live on Mars and lots of robots will isn't because it's a vacation spot. It's because it's the entrepot to the asteroid belt. It's like Kansas City was to the west. And we're living in a period now where people look at the moon and they still think of it as something that doesn't have much to do with us. This is the way Europe looked at North America and South America circa 1500 to 1550. It was amazing that it was there, but it didn't have anything to do with us. Well, out of that came the most advanced and powerful and freest nations in the history of the world. And they're the ones that went on to space. I think something like that is likely to happen again. So we've solved the riddle. The riddle rather has been solved of how do you have indefinite growth with finite resources. The resources of the solar system are not going to be exhausted by exponential expansion for many generations to come, and by that time we'll have been able to expand through the Oort cloud to other stellar systems. So amazingly, in the course of my lifetime, not only have we gone from not knowing much about all that to knowing quite a bit. It's very, very fortunate time to be alive. But we also have the means to extend the actual range of our species and to vastly increase the wealth of our species, which has been so influential, for instance, in the fact that when I was a boy, vast global famines happened all the time. Millions of people died simply because they didn't have access to food. That's over. That only happens now in war zones. The median income of the human species when I was a kid was far below the medium wage of advanced countries today. Um, and yet that's changed too. The world's become essentially middle class. A good many of the objections people have are based on data that's 100 years out of date. We've shown how scientific knowledge and technological progress can and does raise the fortune, not just the people in the countries that do it, but throughout the most of the world. The exceptions are the countries that have the least access to global trade, mostly in Central Africa. But there are solutions there too, and they're not going to come from top down. They'll come from continuing to do what we do, which is to explore and learn and trade and improve the condition of ourselves and our families, and hopefully have a future that's both prosperous and peaceful.
That was very well put. I'd want to ask. I'll just say this. I saw that Elon Musk said pretty much what you said in a nutshell. That at some point in the future, we won't have to worry about money. And from what you just said, I gather that's what he meant. What would I be correct in assuming that?
Well, I don't know, worry about money, but certainly there's no reason any humans should have to worry about hunger or curable disease. Great progress has been made on that front. And a lot of people don't like Elon Musk. I don't know him myself, but um, it's not a question of what you think of people. It's a question of the vectors that entire societies can pursue. Thomas Edison wasn't popular either, by the way, with the American people. Andrew Carnegie is to this day slandered. He's the man who introduced science, had the first R&D department in any corporation in America. I'm a Democrat. I would just mention these things because many of my Democratic colleagues don't seem to understand them. And as a result, recent years been rather hard on our party. But
Yeah.
the future doesn't depend on any one person. Elon redesigned rocketry from the ground up, and the result is that space now is accessible without having to have huge government programs that spend all this all this money. It was the only way we could go before, and it's great that we did it. But neither Elon nor myself nor anybody else knows really what the future is going to be. But what has changed in recent years is what's both possible and plausible to do, and it's a lot more things than looked that way even a decade or two ago.
Well, thank you for answering that. I had to ask because I was just curious. I'd seen it not long ago. So another question I would have for you would be when you were young and stargazing while picking up music over shortwave, what did those two kinds of distance teach you about listening?
Mm. Yeah, it's I suppose you're fortunate if you grow up learning how to learn. Um, for a lot of folks, the process stops at some point, and it usually stops with belief. You form it might be a religious belief that closes up your sense of the of potential knowledge, and or it might be ideological belief. They're more here in the United States. We have fewer religious believers as a percent of the population than we used to have, but many of them have simply fallen into ideological belief. With the same symptoms, they can't reason about it. They don't want to learn about it. They just identify with their beliefs and they despise anyone who calls them into question. Um, and so I think I'm fortunate in that my parents were both self-educated in the sense that they didn't have what's today known as privilege. My father quit school on the day he turned 16, first day it was legal to do so. He was born in Belfast, he was in school in New Jersey. Um, I don't know why, but all his subsequent education came from reading thousands of books, which is what I did as well. I did go to university, but always the most important thing to me has been reading books, and I suppose that's why I turned to writing them because I really respected the men and women who would take the trouble to write, explain complicated things in a way that someone like me could understand. My mom was an orphan. Trained herself, became a nurse, became head chief stewardess of American Airlines, kind of the face of the airline, and
Wow.
they both uh, were examples of how you learn and keep learning, and that enriches your life. And and they both were proficient in music. My father was an excellent singer, and my mother played the piano and so forth. And one of my earliest memories of her in Miami Beach when we had a big house, and she would open the windows in the morning and play the piano, and mockingbirds would fly up to the window and sing along.
Wow.
So to getting the short music on shortwave radio, you get like blues out of WLAC, and these distant stations with all this mysterious stuff that the commercial stations weren't playing. It's very exciting. And so I think really astronomy and music were so important to me growing up. And so when the Voyager record came along, it was a natural kind of slam dunk assignment for me to accept.
Wow. Uh, so like they just sort of lined up and gelled, and I can imagine that the blues. This is a question, kind of. Actually, it is a question. Did how foreign did blues sound to you whenever you first heard it?
Not at all. I got the blues from the first thing I ever heard. It's just terrific American music. You could call it African American music because a lot of the music, of course, was based in Africa and brought over by enslaved Africans. Most of them captured by the Dahomey Empire and jealously guarded their access to the Africa to the Atlantic slave trade. And about 6 in 100 of those poor folks ended up in the United States. I think Zora Hurston, the great journalist of her era, went and actually interviewed some first generation enslaved Africans. It's the only journalist I can think of who did that at the time. Fascinating to read if you get a chance. Um, so it didn't sound alien to me at all. Of course, I liked rock music, which is just a sped up version of blues. Um, but it wasn't available on the local radio, and those are economic reasons. If you went to a record store in South Florida, they weren't selling country blues because the country blues folks were mostly rural black families and they didn't have enough money to buy records. WLAC would sell these packets where a rural buyer could get a package of records that they'd selected and play those records. And those were discounted, so there were many families could afford them. And down in South Florida, the Miami area where I grew up, there wasn't any blues on the radio either. There were two black-oriented stations in Miami, but they were looking their potential audience. They were aimed at black professionals, doctors, lawyers, people who had the money to spend this so that they could sell ads. And the blues were associated with poor people. Um, I've always been very interested in what poor people have to say for themselves, and one of the best things they've had to say for themselves anywhere in the world is American blues.
Absolutely. Yes, that's a really good statement. Uh, for the next question, how close were you to Hunter S. Thompson? And what do you remember from the early Rolling Stone years in San Francisco? Like the working conditions, the characters steering it, the first time you went out drinking with him at a bar after hours. What was your first impression? And did you feel right away that you knew each other? What was it like?
We did seem to have something in common right away. I took a job as New York bureau chief for Rolling Stone. The magazine was in San Francisco at the time, and I was out there on what I think was probably my first visit since taking the job. And I was by myself in an office going over the budget. I always like when I go to work someplace to know what the budget says because that drives what you can do. And no one wanted the budget made public, so I just sat down with a copy of it, and not a copy, but the original thing, because we live in a Xerox society, as Jan Winter pointed out at the time. And he was right. If I'd taken a copy home to New York, it would have been stolen by a bunch of yippies following year when they raided our offices. Um, Budgets aren't anybody's business but the people involved. So I was sitting alone in this room, and Hunter came in, and he was exactly like you might expect. He was wearing Converse sneakers and Bermuda shorts, kind of Hawaiian shirt. He was carrying a six-pack of beer and one of those plastic top things where he'd ripped one off and was drinking it, the aviator glasses. He's wearing a blonde woman's wig. And we said hi and started talking, and that conversation continued for something like 40 years, I guess. We did go out drinking, I think, the next night. Most of them I remember about that night was we both had rental cars, and we managed to misplace both of them before the evening was over. And then I got on a dawn flight to New York. And I saw, a bit of Hunter over the years. He would come by my place in Greenwich Village, and we just kept talking. And I went to his place many times. We also had long telephone conversations. Anytime I had a long drive, I would get Hunter on the phone. We would talk for hours. So he was a great friend and absolutely fascinating conversationalist. And yeah, I would say I'm about as close to him as any friend I've had over the years.
That's amazing. It, what was his work ethic like from what you saw? Like in how could you compare that? I guess I should preface this with David Bowie. Um, you were on tour with David Bowie. Uh, what was it for the Ziggy Stardust tour? Uh, and you got to watch him work up close. And
Yeah.
did my question is, do you see any similarities between the way that Hunter worked and that perhaps you worked and that David Bowie worked?
I didn't. It's funny that you mentioned those two men together because just as Hunter was such a rewarding part of my life, my greatest regret is David Bowie. I think David and I would have had a lot to say to each other, but there were a lot of problems on that tour, all of them caused by David's manager at the time. A couple of years later, he fired him. He should have done it sooner, in my opinion. Um, this man made life very difficult for me. I was going on the tour anyway, right about David or not, because my girlfriend at the time, Ruth Copeland, was the opening act on the tour. So Ruthie and I were going to be on the tour, and I was writing this piece for Rolling Stone, and I was frustrated a lot by David's manager's behavior, who, among other things, kept telling my girlfriend that if she would leave me for him, great things would happen to her career and so forth. I just a despicable man, in my opinion. Um,
Yeah.
and by the time that the tour had got to New York, and I was scheduled to do the interview for the article, and David, by the way, was terrific in that tour. It's tough to do. He came over with the British amps and everything. They had to use converters to use American power. It was early on. I think New York was only the third or fourth stop on the tour. We did Cleveland, Memphis, and then came up, I think. And I don't think the tour was properly scheduled. I think it made it difficult on himself. David came down with the flu. His New York gig was Carnegie Hall, and he came in and went to his dressing room. And as he's reaching for the door, somebody came out and smacked him in the head with the door, nearly knocked him out. He was lying on a couch there with the flu, and this is the performance that all the New York reporters were going to see. Um, that's not how I would have managed him. I would have had him get to New York late in the tour when everything had been ironed out and he was feeling on top of his game. The concert's become something of a legend anyway, and he certainly was very successful at it. And he was also involved with Lou Reed, who I knew well, and I had a lot in common with Lou, and that was a great collaboration. I thought, David produced "Walk on the Wild Side," which is Lou's only real chart-busting hit. And the way he did it, if you listen to the way that track is engineered, very sophisticated. Um, so it came time for the interview, and the manager scheduled it for 10 a.m. in David's hotel. And I objected that no rocker's gonna be up at 10 a.m. But they insisted. So I showed up at 10 a.m. David wasn't anywhere near getting up. After waiting an hour, I went out and had a couple of beers and came back. And eventually, David came in. Meanwhile, these PR types who shouldn't even have been in the room were swarming around. They kept messing with the microphone because they had nothing else to do. You don't do that to an interviewer. The two people who are responsible for that microphone, me and the person I'm interviewing, they shouldn't be touching my gear or telling me what to do. So David finally came in. By that time, I was furious, and we did like a 45-minute interview, and I stood up and ended it and walked out of I was courteous, but it wasn't his fault.
Right.
But when I got to the door, I opened the door and I looked back, and the way David was looking at me, it just broke my heart. And it has ever since, because I think he had something of the same feeling. We had a lot more to say to each other, and that's how it should have been. It would have been great. It's always hurt me that he was mismanaged so badly. It ended. If you read Cameron Crowe's excellent memoirs just out, he spent a lot of time with David when in L.A. a couple of years after that, and it was a hard time for David. And toward the end of it, he took Cameron aside and said, I'm going back to New York. It's take me 3 days, because 5 days or whatever it was, because I don't fly, I take the train. And when I get there, I'm gonna fire Tony DeFries. It was a good idea, something he probably, in my opinion, should have done a few years earlier.
Wow, I that moment in the hotel that you described, I also I would have been felt the same way. And I mean, yes, if you guys would have talked, I mean, because look in the mute the way that you write, I feel that your influences, though I may not know exactly what they are of similar source, right?
Yeah,
And
well, I certainly I pay close attention to everything David did, and I paid close attention, and certainly read everything Hunter wrote. Um, but that's the great thing about art is you can reach people you never meet. I mean, I think one of the really finest writers in the world right now is Taylor Swift. I don't know Taylor Swift. I'm never going to meet her. It doesn't. I'm an 81-year-old man. She's not writing stuff for me. So that's the great thing about art is you don't have to show up as the work itself does so much. But getting back to your question about Hunter, There's there's something very weird about writing. It's not exactly that you write something. There's something in a person who's writing, is capable of writing, that can do the writing. And it certainly is part of you, and you call it part of the brain, let's say. But um, you have only limited control over it. It's writing isn't particularly intellectual. It's more like singing. And a singer, can go out. You could be an opera singer. You go out and you do this amazing thing, but you can only control it to a certain degree. That's the discipline that you bring to it. And it's no real artist, I think, that I've encountered thinks, oh, takes pride in saying, oh, well, that's me, and I'm so great because I can fill this opera hall with that wonderful high C. And um, it's, I was writing something yesterday and I got it broke off, I had something else to do, and then I came back, and it's a little bit like having some beast of burden that you have to whip into shape, and it's almost resentful, It says, well, I was doing this a minute ago. Why didn't you let me just keep doing it? It doesn't have much to do with being intelligent or knowledgeable. Those things might help, but and you can, your one rewrites and edits the what this part of oneself has made. But it's ultimately all creative work is mysterious. You're gonna the reason you write or compose or paint, and my wife's a painter, um, is mysterious, but also is the process is you can't just tell yourself to make a good painting or to write a decent poem or whatever, but you can create the conditions under which that can occur. So this was always a particularly difficult problem for Hunter. Had little formal education. I don't know if Hunter even graduated high school. Um, he also was a person who learned by reading, but also by Hunter was very personable and interacted well with others. I think he learned a lot more like that than a more solitary person like I would. Um, but it's always the same. I've been with Hunter many times when he was trying to write. I went out to help him work on one of his books, and that's serious wood shopping. And he would scream. He had this great scream that was just one of the great natural sounds you ever heard, like something you'd hear in the middle of the woods. Um, he would ask himself questions like, should I maybe if I took two hits of acid that would help. But nothing really helps except that you just have to keep trying. And what you're trying to do is not exactly drive yourself. You're trying to make it possible for whatever this thing is to write something that's worth reading. Um, it's hard to envision before you learn how to do it. It's hard to teach. There's a lot of natural talent involved. I've always thought I've taught writing at four universities, and it's more like being a coach. You can help people get up to a certain level, and then whether they can get beyond that level is more up to them. You can give them the coaching and coach them up, as they say. There's not a huge body of knowledge about how to write that helps. It certainly helps to read good writing because then you fall in love with the way, what's possible writing. And every writer I know that I've known over the years has responded to the great writing that they've read and others and can quote it and so forth. So I think we all go through versions of that. And its virtue in the end is not so much that you can make you rich and famous, although it can, but that it can teach you how to be true, and that's you can you it demands that you be true.
Well put. That was very, what you said was interesting about what you are working on now. Um, and that it can sometimes be an agonizing thing. I've found that, and I know many, like you said, Hunter found it like that, or anyone that's serious about it. Is some type of mechanism that is really do you think it's just out of control of the will completely, and it's almost like a I'm not gonna
No. I mean, you have to want to do it and set up the conditions, and just like anyone else. I mean, if you're a painter, you don't get a studio and do one canvas and say, "Well, this I'm not good at this." You have to be in this loop for some time. There was, when I was growing up, there was a myth about how some writers were thought to find writing easy, that some great writers found writing easy. And the example that was always presented to this myth was Shakespeare. Well, Shakespeare only worked as an example because we know nothing at all about how Shakespeare wrote. We know there are a couple of the history plays that are drafts, that the final draft is missing, hopefully be found someday. So we certainly know he wrote multiple drafts, like, but that's no great discovery. Every writer in history writes drafts one way or another. Um, T.S. Eliot for a while had a thing where he wouldn't move on until he had the first line of the poem, and then he had to get the second line. But that's just a different way of distributing the effort. Um, in my career, there's only one writer I've ever encountered who found it easy, or heard of. I never encountered her, and she was a romance novelist who every day after breakfast would come and lie down on her couch with her little dog on her lap, on her tummy, and would recite to a secretary, and never did a rewrite, and couldn't understand what all the fuss was about. But I read one of her books, and as you can imagine, it wasn't very well written either. What she had, I think, was a gift for talking in a certain way, sort of like the way a minister might, that you can talk well to a certain congregation, and that's where you ought to be, because you feel like you're on the same wavelength. So it's a very difficult process, but all creativity is, I think. An engineer works just as hard as that. Anybody who's trying to make something that didn't exist before.
Yeah, I like that notion of trying to make something that didn't exist before. Um, let's see. We'd answered a lot of the questions in segment naturally there. Let's see. I've got some more. Um, so let's see. You pointed at the um long form explanatory nonfiction is notoriously difficult to
Yeah.
sustain. Did
Yeah.
you have a secret technique or an approach to keep the big piece alive instead of letting it go inert?
No, it's just work. The way I viewed it was that, I mean, I wrote stuff in college. It was just like term papers and such. And but my parents were both writers, and their friends included a number of writers. One of the most inspirational figures I've met was my father was one of his friends was Irving Berlin, the songwriter. Irving Berlin was a stone genius, and just magnificently wealthy and famous from writing popular songs, which were kind of underestimated back then, the same way they are today. But what I learned from Irving was that first, he never stopped learning. He read books constantly. He was always educating himself. He'd never been to college. I don't think he'd ever been to high school. So all of his education had been that way, and that's been important to me. Even though I had a good education, it's you can't beat what you can do yourself that way. And so I'd met these other writers, they were friends of theirs as well, and I could see that it was possible that I might be able to be a writer too. I certainly aspired to that. It seemed like such a free form, you either succeed or fail on your own merits. You can't, if a piece fails, you can't claim afterwards, oh well, the soprano had a cold or the first violinist didn't show up and we had a replacement. It's entirely on you. There's a great purity to that. Um, so I think if I think back on it, it appears to me to be a succession of writing longer stuff. I started out at UPI as a reporter. I'd write straight news, and then sometimes after a year, I was on the night shift, and I could read books and write book reviews for these new books, or did some film criticism. It would all run on UPI. I don't think anybody picked it up really, but it gave me some introduction to other forms. And then I was a feature writer at the New York Post, so that was longer pieces that weren't straight news. And like I spent a day with Jorge Luis Borges, the great writer, and that was I spent a day with Groucho Marx, and so this was a different dimension you could write about. And I came to think of it in terms of length. The longest things I would write for newspapers were around 1,000, maybe 1,500 words. And they were already difficult to organize. Unlike straight news pieces, you really had to work at it. And it was kind of terrifying. Um, the first long piece I did was at the Post. It was a page of the Post, however long that was. And they gave me 2 days to, it was about Mars, which was an extravagant thing for a daily newspaper to do. At 3 p.m. on the second day, the assistant editor came around, looked over his shoulder, and called out to the editor in chief. He doesn't even have the lead yet. In other words, don't expect to fill this page because this guy is on track to fail. And yet I was able to do it and get it published and it was commented on and everything. But you learn that the terror of those things is part of the job. And it's not that different from, boxing or many other things, high steel, lots of things are frightening. I'm not being grandiose about it, but you do have to determine that you're able to work through those situations in which the entire process, reporting the story, digesting it, organizing it, writing something that someone will pay to read, um, all that's on your shoulders, and you got to find the strength to hold that stuff up and to make it happen. So by the time I was at Rolling Stone, we had all these wonderful writers there. Jan Wenner is a brilliant hirer of people, identifier of talent. So I could look around and, my competition were real talented writers, not just Hunter, but a bunch of others. And uh, at, at Rolling Stone, I learned to write 5, 10, 12,000, 15,000 word pieces. Organizing those pieces, reporting them, writing them is extremely taxing. And it's all on you. You can't, if you go and get lunch and you come back, there hasn't been a word improved. You're the one that has to do everything. Um, but I figured if I could master that, and it's a lot of fun too. I mean, I don't mean to make it sound grim. It's a wonderful job to have. But if I could perform at those levels, then that's a chapter of a book. And I guess on some level, I thought ultimately the greatest thing would be to be like those guys I read in the branch library down in rural Florida. That these were grown-ups who clearly could be do something else, doing some other things if they wanted, but they were taking the trouble. And even then, I knew that how much trouble it is to really write things that are as clear as brook water and that reach you somehow.
Right.
So so when I left Rolling Stone, that's what I did. I started writing books.
Well, what's interesting, did you feel when you were younger that you had like a calling or like something inside of you that made you feel like, I have the capacity to do something great. So whenever you looked at something, you could kind of attack it head on with everything you had. So you could write a 10,000 word article about Mars and it be you not be deterred.
Yeah, I think you have to have some level of self-confidence, but I wouldn't call it a conviction. It's just that it's a plausible thing. I mean, I tried out for high school football, but I have 2400 vision, and there weren't any contacts you could wear back then, and I'm too small. So, however much you might like football, it becomes clear to you pretty soon that your future is not going to be in football, and you're not going to be a dancer. You're probably not going to be an opera singer there. I think I always told my students not to get too worried about their futures. For one thing, your future can surprise you, and if you over prepare, you may find that your older self isn't comfortable in what your younger self thought would be a terrific situation. You have to take risks. I dropped out of law school. One of my great professors there was Jim Thompson was criminal law professor, and just fantastic command of the subject, just fascinated me. Jim went on to be two-term governor of Illinois, and I think was then governor again later on in his career. Um, so he was an example to me when I was in law school of what made the law so interesting. In the end, what I would say is that the law is Latin and the science is Greek, and I'm more Greek oriented than Latin. But after I dropped out of law school, I'd gone to New York, and I don't know if I even had a job yet, but if I did, it was paid me $110 a week and work nights at UPI. But Saturday night, I was walking across Times Square, and I didn't have any money, so all my clothes came from used clothing stores, what the hippies called dead men's clothes. I was wearing black welder glasses, and I had a huge bottle of really cheap champagne on my shoulders. I was going to a party. Other impoverished young would, aspiring people like myself, and I ran into Jim Thompson. And we're standing on the sidewalk in Times Square, and this guy was the embodiment of success and responsibility and so forth. Went on to become a very popular public servant. And I could see him looking at me thinking, what happened to him? We thought he had some promise. He had 99th percentile SATs and everything. And of course, I couldn't explain that to him. I didn't know. I just knew that I had to go some other direction here. It had nothing to do with him. He was terrific. So there's a lot of self-doubt and stuff that comes in, and I think you have to have a sense of humor about it. That you're just one person. It's not the end of the world if you fail at something. If you stay honest and you don't hurt people and you tell the truth and keep a sense of humor, your odds are as good as anybody's. And I'd seen lots of folks who'd failed. My parents, my parents were there. My birth was announced in Walter Winchell's column. My parents their friends were all celebrities. They were wealthy. They had matching Cadillacs and everything. All of that gone in 6 weeks. Um, and what they did was continue being the same people: honest, hardworking, reliable, keep a sense of humor.
Yeah. I love that. I think uh s- your what you're saying about being self-taught and this self-drive has a lot to do with the with the way that you write and just the sheer uniqueness of it because there's a lot of people that will it's derivative. I remember seeing I don't want to quote it exactly because I don't remember who said it, but or what interview you were in whenever you said it, but I remember it was something like you didn't want to write like a best you could have written a best-selling book, but you didn't because you would rather have wrote something that was more
Oh
successful.
yeah. Well, what I had in mind there was I don't know if I could have written bestseller. I mean, that's very hard to. Danielle Steele writes bestsellers. She used to be my neighbor, and she's still writing. Very hardworking writer. She has a knack that I would never. I could never do what she does. She's just really good at it.
Yeah.
It's like an opera singer versus a pop singer. There's not a lot of overlap there. And I've known classical musicians who tried to do rock. It's just as difficult as going the other way. But what I meant was when I was at Rolling Stone, some of my colleagues signed book contracts to do books that were perhaps beneath them, you might say, but were going to be best big sellers. Like about music. When there was a contract being shopped around to do a biography of David Bowie, and I was quite fond of David Bowie. I hope whoever did it did a good job, but I was not yet capable of writing a good book. And these creative things, they're so hard to do that you really want to find out how well you can do them. It's excruciatingly hard work. Most of my published stuff is around 12th or 14th draft. Some of the script stuff for documentaries is 20, 21 drafts. It's very hard work. It's not like I'm talented now. This great thing will get written by my talent. Your talents in an external analysis or perspective doesn't have anything to do with the actual work. You learn to be a little more efficient than the next person. But the great thing about it is that in writing, there's no limit to how good you can be, and it's you don't. There's no known limit. There's no wall. So I would take magazine assignments like the New York Times. I did a number of pieces for them, and one attitude that I heard some writers take. I overheard two writers in a library once talking about this. It was disturbing because all they were concerned with was what editors wanted. But to me, the Times Magazine had 1 million readers. If I had an opportunity here to write as well as I possibly could for 1 million readers, that had to be good for everybody, including maybe my future and my ability to get book contracts, things like that. So, there's one case where the editor at the Times Magazine called and said, "We want you to do a piece on the Bionic Man." And I said, "I don't want to write about the Bionic Man." And they said, "Well, what do you want to write about?" And I said, "Well, there's this interesting confluence of physics and cosmology that it's now possible to do the physics of what happened in the Big Bang, starting just a fraction of a second after the beginning. The universe began as a space-time fluctuation, a bubble. It was smaller than an atom. And it's happened many times, I expect, and that's a very interesting thing to have discovered. And you can track the physics from around 10 to the minus 30th of a second. That's a 0.3001 of a second. On through much of the subsequent evolution of the universe. So this never has been done before, and it's producing spectacular results. So they said, "Yeah, sure, okay, $1,500, right about that." That piece took 13 months because it was so fascinating. If I'd taken the attitude like, "Oh, they're only paying me $1,500, that's crazy to spend 13 months on a piece." But instead, my attitude was, "You're being paid to learn. It doesn't matter if you're not being paid much. I'm going to learn this subject really well because it's really important." And so I wrote the piece, and there was some tension in the editing because the magazines aren't really set up for that kind of an approach. But a month soon after it appeared, a producer called me and said, "This would make a great documentary film." And we went down to Texas Instruments, and I pitched it to the president of Texas Instruments, and he said, "Yeah, we'll fund the entire thing, hand him a check before he goes back to the airport." And I suddenly, as a documentary filmmaker, made a 90-minute film called The Creation of the Universe, pretty much on that subject. It was the same thing. So a lot of times, a path that doesn't seem to have any point in the short term will work out in the long term. And to me, the constant is, are you learning? If you're learning, then stick with it. Why would you not?
That's very interesting, and I think that's a resonant point for those in that are younger than the age of 40, or they're trying anyone that's trying to find their place. It aligns with this question that I really wanted to ask you. Uh, did you know at 29 that you were destined for big things? Let's see. Some people like Hunter, he thought that. Maybe I already asked this one. Would the 29-year-old version of you recognize them?
No, you didn't ask me that one. Hunter had a much rougher path than I did. I mean, I had a college education that my parents paid for. Hunter came out of the Air Force and had to teach himself everything. Um, he was aided by a spectacular sense of humor, but nobody learns how to write that well overnight. And Hunter learned as well. You don't know whether you're destined to great things. Hunter was married, had a child, and was still hunting and butchering deer to feed his family. Um, that's to go from there to being the writer that he became was that there's a longer path than I took, and I think one of the things we had in common was that Hunter was a more anguished man than I. Um, he'd had a much rougher childhood, and he'd come along a long way. But what work like that teaches you is integrity and honesty. The Hunter had a somewhat different interpretation of that than I, but we would, we're not two men who would ever lie to each other or try to lie to anybody else. And um, but I think it's everybody has a different story. Charles Dickens, um, all these folks. There are many great writers from the past whose stories we don't know. We don't know, what who Homer was, except I would suggest that Homer is a single author, not some committee, as some scholars think. Um, and anyone who's engaged in trying to make something that worthwhile that doesn't already exist is in for a struggle. And how you deal with that struggle is up to you. But it teaches you a form of integrity, even if you were raised wrong, let's say, and were cheated of those opportunities that should have been things you should have been taught when you were young. And you live with the consequences. So there's a purity to that I quite like. There's nothing cute about it. I don't like indulging artists. I don't like teachers that praise everything their students do or claim that there aren't any standards, and so your crummy art is just as good as James Terrell's work or something. That's deception. But one of my English teachers at Northwestern was Richard Ellman, who wrote the greatest biographies of both Oscar Wilde and James Joyce, and who was a real writer. And from him, I learned that an academic writer similarly had to take on these challenges and be someone of integrity and to have a sense of humor about the fact, there are going to be days when you don't get nothing works. That's true in any creative work. And
Yeah.
if you've seen the documentary of which one am I thinking of? Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers doing that album that took him, what, 14, 16 months in the studio or whatever.
What with Rick Rubin?
Uh, I don't know if Rick Rubin was involved in that project or not, but 16 months in the studio, that sort of thing doesn't happen anymore. The other end of the spectrum, you had like Leonard Skinner, who didn't know that you had multiple takes. So they came to the studio with every song perfect and they just did it. They could have done everything in one take. It was phenomenal. They just didn't know. Um, so I think that's a fascinating panoply. And I think the people that I've met in rock music, Lou Reed, those folks, they'll engage in the same thing. It takes some courage and a sense of proportion. And I'm happy with I've had whatever small segment of that experience came my way.
Yes, sir. So we have 2 minutes left. If you would like to speak for maybe 5 minutes or let's say 10 minutes more, if it ends, I would love that. I have one more question and to ask you about Lou Reed as well, because I didn't get to ask that.
Well, that's true. If we can take a break for a second, I can do that, but I can give you 10 more minutes, but I have to take a break.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Okay, hang on. I'll be right back.
All right. Oh,
Alrighty,
thank you so much for taking just this extra time. Um,
sure.
so um, before the Lou Reed question, if you had to make the golden record again now, what would you fight hardest to preserve, and what would you deliberately resist including?
Well, I would do just the same thing that we did at the time. For our first production meeting, um, I mean, I was just part of a team, and but we were talking about the two things you always do with any producing anything new, that uh, what do we want to achieve and how are we going to achieve it? And what I had to say was that first I'd like to cast a wide net to have music from different cultures of the world try as best we could in a limited 90-minute time frame to represent many different voices, not just the culture that had built the spacecraft. And second, to make a good record. And what I meant by that was we have all the music in the world to choose from here. There's nothing constrictive about this. You could make a Voyager record every year for time immemorial, and they'd all be good records because there's fortunately a lot of great music and produced by the human species. But what I meant specifically was no compromises, no log rolling, no saying I'll vote for your dumbass choice if you'd vote for my choice. Everyone unanimous on everything that we do. And so I would just do that again. We'd have a different result. I've resisted doing any such projects since. There've been a number of time capsules since of various sorts, but I think we did a pretty good job that time, and that the record has a projected lifetime of during which you can reliably expect to play it of 1 to 2 billion years. So the Earth is only 4.5 billion years old. So it was a great project to be involved in. Very, very happy to have been able to contribute to it. Um, but if we were doing some other one, I would just try to do it the same way. I think we got a decent result, and there's nothing narrow about it. It's a wide, generous kind of a thing, and there's no reason that you shouldn't do a good job.
I love the uncompromising style. How did y'all go about doing that? Because you're probably familiar with the producer Phil Spector. He
Yeah,
had the wrong way of going about that.
well, you got some good results, but
He did.
Phil, according to Jimmy Iovine, Phil threatened John Lennon with a pistol and tied him up and locked him in a closet.
Really?
I don't have much use for a man who would do that.
No, absolutely not. No. But in terms of, I guess what I'm saying is that you had the capacity to do that uh righteously and in the correct way, and your team was compliant with you. Were there
Well,
any
also with one another. I mean, most of the music on the record wasn't originated by me. I concentrated on the classical stuff. I was into blues. I had a lot of blues recordings, including Dark Was the Night, but I think the suggestion to use Dark Was the Night came from Alan Lomax. So it was a real team effort. Everyone made important contributions. I don't think there was any particular voice in it, but I did realize pretty early that this was a producer-centric job, so I'd better become the producer. And because I had been, I was always fascinated by audio. When I was 12 years old, I started working on building audio systems. My stereo today is the ongoing manifestation of that one that started with a table radio in 1956. And so I knew how to cut tape and the one thing I am proud of in that regard was that I was able to go into a famous sound studio in Manhattan, CBS Records, and do a project in about 2 weeks and not waste anyone's time. I understood the process and I was brought up to, understand professionalism and not stick your nose into something that you don't have the professional background to handle. And so I was fortunate that that happened to be the case.
that is really cool. Audio engineering is fascinating. Um, I the last question was about Lou Reed. It was from earlier, what you mentioned. So Lou Reed, how did you come across him, and what did you find interesting about his work that you said? I'd say I'd like to ask about his work ethic. That's something that I'm interested in hearing from you. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I was over at Lou's place. So I think it was on the day he wrote a song called Senselessly Cruel, and he played it for me on the piano. It was a terrific version. And I had it, I recorded it. And then, of course, like all idiots, I did something special with that tape because rather than just leave it with all the other tapes, and now I can't find it. So, um, what happened with Lou was Lou was one of the great New York artists, and I was familiar with his work and appreciated it. And he was a tormented soul, like all artists, I think, on some level. You know, the ones who like Updike, who seemed to make it easy. John Updike would write in the morning and be done, and then he'd have all afternoon to fill. There are a few writers like that, but I think there's a lot going on below the decks. Um, Lou made an album called Berlin, which is a real step forward for him or for anybody. Um, and I had John Landau, who was running the review section back then. The record review section of Rolling Stone is kind of outboarded. I know that some rockers would think that they said something nasty to Jan Wenner, and then he went back and ordered a critic to write a bad review of their next album. That stuff doesn't happen because it'd be self-destructive if for an editor or publisher to treat a reviewer that way means that the reviewer will leave and you'll be left with nothing but hacks. And then you can spend your career telling them what reviews to write and see how many people read those reviews. Uh, so John was in charge of all these freelance reviewers, and he sent a memo around to everyone saying he would invite suggestions as to how we could improve the section, the back of the book there. And that was a good thing to do because there was a lot of talent at Rolling Stone. I'm sure he got a lot of good suggestions. What I said to him was, well, you could not do what we did last week, which was to take one of the most important records of the century, Lou Reed's Berlin, and kiss it off, not only because you didn't like or understand it, not him, but the critic. I forget the name of the critic. He's an established, strong critic. Um, and not also invoke his career. The review ended by Lou or goodbye Lou or something like that, as if somehow this critic knew that this was the end of his career, that this horrible work meant that he would no longer get a record contract. That was actually a real fear that Lou had, that his record company, RCA, would drop him because they didn't like the record. Lou went out and recorded a live album immediately to try to improve his position with the record company because they had this record that didn't sell and nobody liked, but which was a real step forward for any artist and also a magnificent piece of work. Um, so Jan called me. Jan was always very creative. He's called mercurial, but what he was really creative, risk-taking editor. I had the great good fortune to have the best magazine editor of the day in my career. I had one of the best book editors in New York. I had the finest agent. All those things were just luck, really. And so Jan called and said, "Well, we never ran two reviews of the same record. But if you feel that way, why don't you just write a review and we'll publish the review?" You know, hardly anybody would be willing to be that wild. It was really a cool idea. So I started work on listening to the record closely and writing the review. And then a few days later, RCA was rushing out, I guess, the live album to sort of, from their standpoint, recoup Lou's career from what perhaps they saw as some kind of error. You know, record labels were no better than the rest of us at appreciating what's really good and so forth on first listening. Um, and so Jan said, "Well, why don't you just review the live album and then you can say whatever you want to say about the Berlin in there." And so I did. And I criticized the previous reviewer for conflating artistic creativity with morality, as if Lou somehow had to approve of the drug addicts and sex addicts and losers who populate the Berlin album. Um, in one case, virtually a killer. Um, that somehow that meant it couldn't be good art. That's a complete misreading of the nature of art. Shakespeare's closest contemporary competitor in London was stabbed to death by a bunch of conspirators and was himself thought to be a spy. Everybody, every young man on the streets was wearing swords. I mean, this is art. Art. There's nothing pretty here or uh, you know approved of about creative work. Um, and so that appeared, and Lou called me and said, I think he was just appreciative, and I think he probably felt that I could write a Rolling Stone profile or something. I did actually write a profile of him later, but it wasn't as he was hoping for a cover piece. That's whatever that was. But
Yeah.
we turned out to have a lot to talk about, and he used to come over. I was living in Gramercy Park at the time, and we would sit and drink and talk about everything under the sun. I think, creativity always provides you with an interesting perspective on things. It's sort of like, if you're an aviation engineer, there's a lot to talk to other aviation engineers about. I think, writing songs and prose and stuff. My son is a songwriter, so I know it's a similarly challenging uh, occupation. And we would go out to parties and go out to dinner and stuff. I never saw this angry, acerbic, insulting Lou that people talked about, but I didn't try to keep up with him on his all night jaunts. He would go out and he'd call and say, "Yeah, we're at so and so's, and everybody's here is interesting. Come on over." I say, I'm working. I got to work. And then a couple hours later, he calls, "Say, we're at this club. It's great, and come on up." And I say, "I have to work." And then around 2 or 3 in the morning, the phone would ring. There's all landlines. You pick up the phone, and it would just be a sound like, it's just like the gates of hell had opened. Lou shouting over the sound, saying, "The most beautiful women you've ever seen, Tim, but don't be fooled. None of them are women." And he was running on speed in those days, and I wasn't into that. But on the other hand, I was walking in the West Village one afternoon about 5 p.m. I was coming back, I think, from a squash game or something, and I ran into Lou and a couple of his friends, and he said, "We're going to go hear this gal from New Jersey, Patti Smith. It's the first time, I think he said it was the first thing she was playing in Manhattan. She'd been playing over in Jersey." And I'd heard of Patti Smith too. He said, "You want to come along?" I said, "Yeah." We went to this club, and it was before the club was to open. It was like 6 p.m. And it was just Patti and what's the guitar player, the great guy, wonderful guitarist. Sorry to be blanking on his name. I played with him once. He's a terrific guy. Anyway, it was just the two of them and these songs, and they put Lou right front row center. It's a supper club, so we were 10 feet, 8 feet away from Patty. But Lou had been running on speed for 4 days and nights, and so he immediately fell asleep. His head just went over my shoulder. He fell asleep. So I was listening to this fabulous concert. Lenny Kaye is her guitar, and I was just hoping the lights were okay, that they couldn't see that Lou, who was the person she most would have been playing for in the club, was sound asleep. Lou didn't snore, so that wasn't a problem. And we went through the whole show like this. Similar to the afternoon I spent once with Mike Nichols listening to a classical thing. Mike would wake up and applaud, and then go right back to sleep. Um, and fortunately, as we were leaving, I left a little ahead of the others. Lou was staying for some reason. But Lenny was at the front door saying hi to everybody leaving. Good, smart thing to do. And he said, "Did you see Lou Reed was in the audience?" And that relieved me because it meant he couldn't see it, from the stage, and that meant it was all okay. So it's a great guy, Lou, and I was really happy that he met Laurie Anderson, who had also been someone whose work really appealed to me from the very beginning, and they were a great match, and he was just crazy in love with her. And, he liked to watch her set up. We'd sit in the side and watch her. And he was just so impressed. You know, she carries all the gear up with her. Just one person show sets it up, delivers the whole show.
Why was she? It was just a acoustic, or what was it? Like,
It's a show she's been doing for 20 years. It's her on keyboards, electronic music with him doing her own songs, and she did a lot of gigs like that. I always quite liked Laurie's work. I was very happy that they were able to have the time together that they did.
well, that is a profoundly special story, and that was really funny. Um, th- wow, they was running on speed all night. And it's funny because Hunter, that's what I'm told he did, but I guess I don't know if he was just in Woody Creek probably, right? And I guess
Yeah, what happened, all these guys who were up late ran on speed for years, and then when they could afford cocaine, they switched to cocaine. Um, and cocaine's a step up. You know, it's a better drug if you're going to do that stuff. Um, and you know, a lot of them had kind of club lives where you go out like Tim Leary did, and you go to a club, and the younger people come and tell you, flatter your ego and everything, and the drug dealers come and slip you stuff. And I was never much for the club scene, but and I don't think Hunter was really either. But a lot of those guys were like that. You know, it's all just human beings. It's all just folks trying to get along. There are no superhumans. There's no person who's going to save you if he's elected president or if she becomes the biggest pop star in the world. It's all a level playing field, and everybody deals with it as they see fit. But yeah, I spent a lot of time with Hunter and his place in Colorado. And Hunter was very solicitous. Um, you know, if his assistant Deborah was fell ill for a couple of weeks once, I remember, and he just stopped everything else mostly. He still talked on the phone, but he would stopped everything else to take care of Deborah. I had altitude sickness up there once, the only time that ever happened to me, and Hunter had me lie down on a couch and got me bottled oxygen, which is the best thing you can do. So I was there breathing the bottled oxygen. After a minute, he said, "I hesitate to recommend cocaine, but it's always worked for me."
My goodness, he is a doctor, right?
Yeah, we did have a doctoral aside, and he also had a PhD from some diploma mill. He used to mystify people by using doctor in his. The main thing Hunter was very funny. Uh, the juxtapositions in life of sort of not belonging anywhere, and yet having your list of friends include some of the most famous people in the world and the president of the United States and all that. I think that struck Hunter as it's quite inherently funny. He was extraordinarily funny guy, and didn't tell stories. Particularly as I get older, I lapse into telling stories all the time, and Hunter saw that I think as a kind of time trap. So his he was always fresh and original and responding to the immediate situation rather than sort of playing off past glories or anything like that. But he demanded a high level of stimulation from life on a day-to-day basis, and he was also very generous about it. When my son, I was at a conference at the Aspen Institute on Einstein, and my son suggested he come up and maybe we could both go see Hunter. So we did. He came up. We played some tennis, which is a horrible game to play at that altitude, even with the high altitude balls. And then we went over to Hunter's, and Hunter generously just gave him the whole experience. You know, we talked for hours, had a few drinks, went to Woody Creek Tavern, had something to eat. On the drive home, the hunter suddenly turned right off the road, right up a raw mountainside, through a hole in the fence and onto a racetrack where he'd done this many times before. Then we took turns driving the track because he was interested. Hunter and PJ O'Rourke and I were going to write a book called How to Drive about cars. We were all car enthusiasts, and I'd done some racing. I think PJ may have too. And Hunter was always sort of concerned with, would his driving, he didn't think his driving ability would be up there if we were actually tested at a track event or something in connection with the book. And so I would turn laps and give him the same cues you give everybody in driving on a racetrack. And then Hunter would race. And meantime, I think my son was in the back with Hunter's girlfriend at the time. And then we went on, back to his place. And that was the whole experience. He'd done that for a number of folks. That he would do it for my son was really quite quite generous of spirit, I thought.
So he was just an overall generous guy. I've never gotten that take. I think that that's remarkable, and
Well,
I
if I could, let me, this story has appeared in print, but just so you know, um, when I was at Rolling Stone, I was the bureau chief, but after a while, Jan proposed that I just write because they liked the writing and not worry about the bureau chief administration. So I did that, but it made me vulnerable. I was the highest paid person at Rolling Stone. I was being paid solely to write. That meant that they're going to saw that limb off the next time they get a couple of ad pages canceled. And so that did happen, and I was let go. And Jan came out and did it in person, which was very nice of him. But I did ask, I wanted severance pay because I'm a professional. I expected to get severance at workplace a couple of years. And he didn't want to pay severance. And that was when I went on the Bowie tour, actually. So I got to Memphis and called Hunter just to talk about what had happened. And his wife, Sandy, was there, and she said that you have to remember this is all landlines back then. She said Hunter's in his suite at the Watergate, and you can call him there. I know because we just got off the phone. And I said, so I went on to talk to Sandy. How are things going? I said, it's okay, but we're worried about money because there's nothing coming in. I think Hunter was a Washington correspondent for Rolling Stone at the time, but he was only getting paid every couple of weeks, maybe. And she said, we only have $400 left in the bank, and we're not sure how to pay the bills. And so I was calling with concern about that. So we finished, and I called Hunter at the Watergate, and he said, "How you doing?" I said, "I'm fine. Everything's good, but I got fired, and Jan doesn't want to pay me severance." And Hunter said, "Do you need any money? I could send you $400."
wow, my goodness, man, that's that is something else. If there's anybody that's kind-hearted, that's it. It's they have that expression, "Give the shirt off your back." That's close
Yeah,
to it.
yeah,
It's money that you can get.
that's a that's a real friend. So I
Wow.
think, he Hunter was never afraid of taking risks because I think all writers take risks. And, his view was, it'll work out somehow, and it did.
Absolutely. I mean, he's definitely that's what attracted me to him. The humor. Some people were attracted to other things, but the humor, for sure. I'm glad that you pointed that out as well. I mean, I laughed so hard the first time I read Hunter. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
but
it's a great. I think Tom Wolfe is right. He was the funniest American writer since Mark Twain. And Mark Twain was a self-creation too. He the white suits. His name wasn't Mark Twain. All that. There's very some similarities.
yes, that's the self-made person. Um, it, I think a lot of people can relate to that. I know I can because my parents come from the same um sort of background that you described from. But so yeah, I relate to you a lot, and I'm very much looking forward to writing this article and having this video. By the way, Margaret said to tell you hello and that she hopes that you're doing well, and she can't wait for you to get the copy of Hell's Angels that I think she sent it over yesterday. I'm not quite sure.
Yes, that's what I understand. Is it's coming. I look forward to seeing it. I know she's been doing a lot of good stuff with regard to Hunter's work, and I appreciate her doing so. And all the years I knew Hunter, he would talk about suicide. I used to say, yeah, what's your hurry? We have 100 million, 100 billion years to be dead. What's your hurry? And I would just like to say in closing here, because the usual conspiracy theories and so forth have been flying around this stuff.
Sure.
Um, there was nothing wrong with Hunter's mind. I talked to Hunter the Friday. That's 2 days before he died. He was brilliant as ever. His problems were all physical. He could barely walk. He could make a few steps. He'd come back from New Orleans where he was unable to climb the stairs to attend a dinner in his honor. This is a humiliating thing for any man, particularly a man who's so physically um, expressive as Hunter was. And he feared, I think, being coming under the control of a kind of nurse Ratchet, who would wheel him around and tell him when he could do things. And Hunter worked hard for his freedom, and he wasn't about to give it up. So I don't know. There's not much more I can say about that than that, but those are the facts, and there'll be speculations about this for a long time to come. I suppose there's folks that like to write fiction and call it nonfiction, but those are the facts.
Well, thank you for speaking that. I really think that's important because the guy, I want to elaborate there because I'm really not sure. You knew him. I thank you so very much. That for the Gonzo Fest. That's from the 16th to the 19th. I'm not sure. Margaret said that you wouldn't be able to attend. Um, I I'm not. Did you have you been to one before the last few
No,
years?
I really don't go to anything. I'm up here in Sonoma County. I'm in my observatory waiting for clear weather. Uh, I don't
Oh,
go to much anymore. I got too much to do. Here's a book I'm trying to get finished. But I thank you for the invitation, Daniel, and I appreciate talking with you. I wish you well.
I appreciate it too. Thank you so much, Timothy. Thank you.
Bye bye.
All right, bye bye.